For firefighters, a brush fire is one of the most routine emergency calls they can receive. But on June 29, 2025, in northern Idaho, what looked like a routine wildfire response became something far more dangerous. Instead of battling flames, firefighters found themselves under gunfire. Within minutes, experienced first responders were fighting for survival, desperately trying to warn others before they unknowingly drove into the same deadly trap. By the end of the day, 2 veteran battalion chiefs had lost their lives. Another firefighter had suffered life-changing injuries, and an entire community was left asking one question: how could a routine fire call turn into a planned ambush? This is the story of what happened on Canfield Mountain. A normal Sunday, at first, Canfield Mountain sits just outside Coeur, Idaho. The area is popular with hikers, mountain bikers, and outdoor enthusiasts. During the summer, however, dry vegetation means even a small fire can spread quickly. On the afternoon of June 29th, emergency dispatchers received reports of smoke coming from the mountain. The call did not initially appear unusual. Brush fires happen every year, especially during hot, dry conditions. Fire crews are trained to respond quickly before small fires become major wildfires. Firefighters from multiple agencies headed toward the upper parking area, expecting another routine response. Among them were Battalion Chief John Morrison, Battalion Chief Frank Harwood, and Engineer David Tisdale. Together, they had decades of experience responding to emergencies. None of them knew they were driving into a carefully planned attack. The first encounter, when firefighters arrived, they encountered a young man later identified as 20-year-old Wes Raleigh. According to investigators, Raleigh was standing near his pickup truck close to the parking area. Firefighters reportedly asked him to move his vehicle so emergency equipment could reach the fire more easily. At first, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Raleigh complied with the request, but investigators later concluded that instead of leaving the area, he changed into tactical-style clothing, moved into the surrounding brush, and positioned himself above the firefighters. Authorities believe the fire had been intentionally set to lure first responders into the area. What looked like a wildfire response had become an ambush. The attack, only minutes after the firefighters arrived, gunfire erupted from higher up the hillside. The shots came without warning. The firefighters suddenly found themselves under attack from an elevated position, making it difficult to determine exactly where the shooter was located. Within moments, Battalion Chief John Morrison, Battalion Chief Frank Harwood, and Engineer David Tisdale had all been struck by rifle fire. The peaceful mountain trail instantly became a combat zone. Smoke from the fire mixed with the sound of gunfire, creating confusion for everyone on scene. Even more concerning, additional firefighters and emergency personnel were still responding to what they believed was an ordinary brush fire. They had no idea shots had already been fired. A critical radio call. Despite suffering devastating injuries, Engineer David Tisdale managed to reach his radio. His message was brief but urgent. He warned incoming crews that firefighters had been shot and that they should stay away from the upper parking area. That transmission changed everything. Instead of driving directly into the ambush, arriving firefighters stopped, took cover, and immediately realized they were facing an active shooter, not simply a wildfire. Officials later credited those warnings with helping prevent additional casualties. In moments of extreme stress, clear communication can save lives. That afternoon it did. The mission changes. Within minutes, the emergency response shifted completely. What had started as a fire response was now an active shooter incident. Law enforcement officers from multiple agencies rushed toward the mountain. Their objectives were suddenly very different. They needed to locate the shooter, rescue wounded firefighters, secure the area, and determine whether anyone else remained trapped on the mountain. Because the attack came from elevated terrain covered with thick vegetation, officers had little information about the suspect's exact location. Every movement carried significant risk. No one knew whether there was one shooter or multiple shooters. No one knew whether additional ambushes had been planned, and no one knew whether more firefighters were still alive, waiting for help. As officers began organizing their response, time was becoming the enemy. The wounded needed immediate medical care, but reaching them meant moving directly into an area where gunfire could begin again at any moment. The rescue operation would become one of the most dangerous missions many of those officers had ever faced.
Hey, we got movement! Hey, we got movement down the street! Movement down there, guy in gray. Hey, watch down
The first rescue attempt. As law enforcement established a command post near the base of Canfield Mountain, officers faced a difficult reality. They knew firefighters were still on the mountain. They knew at least some of them had been shot, but they didn't know exactly where the shooter was hiding. The terrain worked against them. Dense trees, steep hillsides, and limited visibility made it nearly impossible to safely approach on foot. Every trail, every patch of brush, and every ridge could provide cover for an attacker. Instead of rushing uphill, officers began building a coordinated response. SWAT officers, deputies, federal agents, K-9 teams, and drone operators all converged on the scene. Their first priority was gathering information without exposing more people to danger. Drones were launched above the mountain in an attempt to locate the shooter. At the same time, armored rescue vehicles, commonly known as Bearcats, were brought in to protect officers during rescue operations. Even with that protection, no one knew whether the gunman was still watching the parking lot. A race against time. Every minute mattered. The firefighters who had been shot needed emergency medical treatment, but reaching them meant driving directly into an active kill zone. Officers carefully planned their approach. The Bearcat would move toward the upper parking area while other officers provided security from behind cover. Medical teams waited farther down the mountain, ready to receive anyone who could be evacuated. Everyone understood the risks. If the shooter opened fire again, the rescue team could become the next targets. Still, waiting wasn't an option. The rescue began. Under fire. As the armored vehicle moved toward the parking area, officers scanned the hillsides for any movement. Smoke from the brush fire still drifted through the trees, making visibility even worse. The location was eerily quiet. Then gunfire erupted again. The rounds confirmed what officers feared. The shooter was still nearby. Rather than retreating immediately, the rescue team continued its mission, using the armor of the vehicle for protection while searching for the wounded firefighters. Despite the danger, they succeeded in reaching survivors. Engineer David Tisdale, suffering from severe gunshot injuries, was loaded into the armored vehicle along with others who had survived the attack. The Bearcat then began its descent toward waiting paramedics. For the first time since the ambush began, injured firefighters were finally receiving advanced medical care. But the mission was far from over. 2 firefighters still remained. As officers compared information from firefighters and radio traffic, they realized not everyone had been rescued. Battalion Chief John Morrison and Battalion Chief Frank Harwood were still near the original attack site. No one knew if they were alive. Making matters worse, officers still couldn't confirm the shooter's exact location. Every rescue attempt meant exposing more personnel to potential gunfire. The decision became incredibly difficult: leave no one behind, or risk losing even more first responders. Searching for the shooter. While rescue teams regrouped, drone operators continued searching from above. Officers watched every trail leading into and out of the mountain. Witnesses who had escaped described hearing rifle fire from higher ground, but no one could provide an exact location. That uncertainty forced officers to assume the suspect could appear from almost anywhere. Every movement was made carefully. Vehicles were positioned to provide cover. Officers stayed behind trees, rocks, and armored vehicles whenever possible. Communication became just as important as equipment. Small pieces of information, where shots were heard, where smoke appeared, where someone thought they saw movement, were constantly shared among teams trying to build a clearer picture of the situation. The second rescue. With no safe alternative, officers prepared for another trip to the upper parking area. This mission carried even greater risk. The suspect had already demonstrated he was willing to fire at rescuers. Everyone understood that another burst of gunfire could happen without warning. The Bearcat once again climbed toward the scene. This time, officers focused on recovering the 2 battalion chiefs, while continuing to search for anyone else who might still be trapped. As they approached the area, they moved cautiously, using the armored vehicle itself as protection. The scene was heartbreaking. The firefighters were found where they had fallen during the initial attack. Despite the rescue team's efforts, it quickly became clear that Battalion Chief John Morrison and Battalion Chief Frank Harwood had died from their injuries. Their recovery marked one of the most emotional moments of the operation. Even as officers worked to bring them home, they still had to remain alert. The shooter had not yet been found. An operation still in progress. Hours after the first emergency call, authorities continued treating the mountain as an active crime scene. Roads remained closed. Residents nearby were asked to stay away from the area, while tactical teams searched for any sign of the suspect. Investigators also began collecting witness statements from firefighters, officers, and civilians who had been on or near the mountain that afternoon. Piece by piece, they began reconstructing what had happened. Evidence increasingly suggested the fire itself had not been an accident. Instead, investigators believed it had been deliberately started to draw emergency responders into a vulnerable position. If true, the attack had been carefully planned long before the first firefighter arrived. As daylight slowly faded, one question remained unanswered. Where was Wes Raleigh? Authorities knew who they were searching for. They simply didn't know where he was hiding. That uncertainty kept everyone on edge. Even after several hours, no one could rule out the possibility that another attack might occur before the day was over. The search comes to an end. As the afternoon turned into evening, officers continued searching Canfield Mountain with extreme caution. The immediate priority had shifted from rescuing victims to finding the gunman before anyone else was hurt. Investigators identified the suspect as 20-year-old Wes Raleigh. Using legal emergency procedures, authorities were able to track the location of his cell phone. The signal remained in roughly the same area for hours, suggesting he had not left the mountain. Rather than rushing into an uncertain situation, law enforcement relied on drones and aerial surveillance to gather as much information as possible. Every decision was made with one goal in mind: prevent another loss of life. Investigators later determined he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The weapon believed to have been used in the ambush was found nearby. After nearly 5 hours of uncertainty, the immediate threat had finally come to an end. What investigators learned? With the mountain secured, investigators began the painstaking process of examining the scene. What began as a wildfire investigation had become a homicide investigation involving multiple state, local, and federal agencies. Crime scene investigators documented the terrain, recovered evidence, and interviewed witnesses to better understand how the attack unfolded. Although many questions about the suspect's motives remained unanswered, investigators were able to establish a clear timeline of the events that led to the ambush. The fire itself eventually burned approximately 26 acres before crews were able to fully contain it. The hero who kept talking. Among the many stories of courage that emerged that day, one stood out. Despite suffering catastrophic injuries, engineer David Tisdale never stopped thinking about the safety of others. After being shot, he managed to broadcast a warning over his radio, alerting incoming firefighters that they were heading into an active shooter situation. Those few moments of communication gave responding crews the information they needed to stop, take cover, and change their approach. Many believe that warning prevented additional firefighters from driving directly into the ambush. Following his recovery, he retired after 24 years of service. His actions during those critical moments earned widespread recognition for extraordinary bravery under impossible circumstances. Honoring those who served. Many were recognized for their professionalism and courage during one of the most dangerous emergency responses their communities had ever experienced. But the greatest sacrifice was made by Battalion Chief John Morrison and Battalion Chief Frank Harwood. Both men spent years serving their communities, responding to fires, medical emergencies, rescues, and countless calls for help. On June 29, 2025, they answered one more emergency call, never knowing it would be their last. Their deaths deeply affected fellow firefighters, law enforcement officers, family members, and the communities they had dedicated their lives to protecting. The attack on Canfield Mountain will be remembered as one of the most tragic incidents involving firefighters in recent Idaho history. It claimed the lives of 2 respected battalion chiefs, seriously injured another firefighter, and forever changed everyone who responded that afternoon. Those actions remind us why first responders continue to earn the public's trust. Every alarm they answer carries uncertainty, but they respond anyway, knowing someone may need their help. Their service and their sacrifice will not be forgotten.